I hate parties. Always have and always will. This last party I went to has cemented that fact. I was always the quiet kid in high school, and not much changed when I entered college. I kept to myself most of the time, only interacting with others during group projects. I would have been completely fine with being the quiet loner for all of college life too. However, my roommate couldn't help but stick her nose in where it didn't belong. "Hey Willow, want to go to a party?" my roommate asked one night, as I was reading a book on my bed. "The nearby frat's throwing a party tonight." I looked at her with a deadpan gaze. Do you really need an answer to that question? My roommate rolled her eyes. "Yeah, I figured that was coming. Still, it wouldn't hurt to give it a try." "No thanks. I'm good. You have fun though." "Uh-huh." She paused for a moment before speaking again. "Did I mention that they have free food?" We got into my roommate's car and arrived at the frat in under an hour. Hey, free food is free food, right? A broke-ass college girl like me wasn't going to pass on an easy meal that wasn't cup ramen like that. The bouncer didn't even bother asking our names when he saw that we were girls and let us in right away. The party was already underway inside. People, mostly girls missing a few crucial articles of clothing, were getting wasted on whatever the hell was in those red paper cups. My roommate went to get 2 full cups and handed one to me. "Thanks," I said, as I looked at its contents. To my surprise, it wasn't the piss yellow beer I thought it'd be. Is this red wine they're serving?" "Sure is," said my roommate. "House Delta Psi Omega is classy like that." Immediately after saying that, she went to chug God knows how much of said wine through a hose while upside down. Where the hell the frat got their hands on a wooden wine keg, I still have no idea. I took one sip of the wine and my face scrunched up in disgust. It was wine, all right, and I hated wine. And all alcohol for that matter. I ditched the cup of wine on a table when no one was looking, and went straight to the snacks table. I may not like frats all that much, but I gotta hand it to them. They knew how to choose their party snacks. Within the hour, I became the only sober person left in that frat house. A pink, drunken blush pervaded everyone else's faces. For a moment, I thought the party might not be so bad after all. At the very least, I'd get to see a bunch of frat boys and sorority girls making fools out of themselves. But then came the guy in a robe. I almost didn't notice him at first in the chaos of the party. He descended from the stairs of the frat house, his long purple robe dragging behind him down the steps as he descended, and he was wearing what looked like a ring of grapevine around his head like a crown. While everyone else was drinking from red paper cups, he had an honest-to-God goblet brimming with wine in his hand. The weird guy raised the goblet in the air. "To Greek life!" he shouted. "To Greek life!" echoed everyone else at the party, even those not part of the frat. "And to Dionysus!" the robed man continued. "And to Dionysus!" My eyebrow raised at the name. I recognized it from one of my ancient mythology courses. If I remembered correctly, Dionysus was supposed to be the Greek god of wine. A little odd, but I brushed it off. I guess the frat must have taken the whole Greek life thing pretty seriously. Someone started playing music, and without any prompting, the people in the party started to dance. I kept to myself in a corner of the room while everyone else flailed their limbs around like in a drunken bliss. The dance went on for hours, or at least felt like hours to me. The disorganized dancing formed into a cohesive ring of people dancing next to each other, hand in hand, without a care in the world. The dance all surrounded one person, the guy in the purple robe, who looked on approvingly. The more I looked on, the more uncomfortable I started to feel. I always knew frats were kinda like cults, but this was getting way too obvious. I wanted to leave, but didn't want to risk pushing through the drunk dancers and breaking the ring they'd formed. Something about the looks of crazed ecstasy in their eyes told me that they wouldn't take too kindly to being interrupted. I was literally saved by the bell when someone rang the doorbell. "Pizza delivery!" yelled the pizza guy from the other side of the door. Every head in the room turned towards the door. the stuporous joy on their faces warped into an insane rage. A horde of college girls stormed to the door, opened it, and dragged the hapless delivery boy inside. In 100 other scenarios, this would have been a dream come true for any guy. Not this time, though. They pinned him onto the ground as he squirmed under them in a futile struggle. He yelled at them to let him go, but nobody was listening. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the man in the purple robe. "Sparagmos!" he shouted. "Sparagmos! Sparagmos! Sparagmos!" repeated the drunk college students over and over again. I watched in horror as they tore the delivery boy apart. They tore him limb from limb, starting with his arms and legs, before the robed man ripped off his head whilst the partygoers held back his torso. The poor bastard screamed all the way, right up until his head was separated from his body. I escaped the party through a back window in all the confusion and called the police. When they got there, the drunk partygoers were feasting on the dismembered body of the murdered delivery boy. The robed man sat above them all on the top of the stairs, tearing off and eating strips of flesh from the delivery head. Needless to say, I'm never going to another frat party again. Hey guys, I see many of you commenting on my videos that this channel deserves 1 million subscribers. But I also see the percent of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed to the channel. So, if you like the content, want to support my channel, and want to see this channel reach 1 million subscribers, or maybe 500,000 subscribers, then go ahead, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. My twin brother and I became homeless at a young age. Our parents were abusive, so we ran away from home when we were 13. They didn't even bother reporting us as missing. I guess they must have been glad to have us out of their hair. Trying to live on the streets was hard, but it was still better than living with our parents. Besides, we always had each other. For a time, we thought that was all we needed to survive. No matter what problem came our way, we thought the two of us could overcome it together. Whether it be starting a fire in a trash can to keep warm during the winter, or scavenging the dumpsters behind restaurants for leftovers, we did it all together. I know it sounds like a miserable existence, but despite all the hardships we faced, we were able to find some semblance of happiness and content in each other's company. We were a family. That is, until the day we met the cult that would ruin both of our lives. Our first exposure to them came from one of their recruiters. To this day, I remember how out of place those people looked strolling around the dirty, piss-stained alleyways where homeless people slept. They were all dressed in fine, well-fitted suits that were just asking for trouble in that part of town. Their wealthy appearance would have made them prime targets for muggers had they not been traveling in a sizable group. At the time, I found it strange that a bunch of people who were all clearly rich enough to afford loitering anywhere else would even choose to be in this part of the city. My brother and I huddled close to each other under our shared tattered blanket. We were trying to make ourselves as small and unnoticeable as possible, so the people would ignore us as they passed. The last time a non-homeless person noticed us in the alleyway, they beat the shit out of us for fun, and we didn't feel like going through all of that again. One of them approached us, and my brother immediately put himself between me and the suited man. Although we were twins, he often played the role of a protective brother to me, even at the cost of himself getting hurt. To our surprise, the suited man didn't act aggressive. He just stopped in front of us with a gentle smile on his clean-shaven face. "Are you kids doing all right?" he asked, as if talking to an old friend. "We're doing fine, thanks," my brother said. "Just trying to get by." The suited man tilted his head to look at me. "Does she feel the same?" I hid behind my brother and averted my eyes. The man just let out a small laugh. "Shy one, isn't she?" he said, as calm as ever. "Look, can you tell us what it is you want from us?" my brother asked, growing even more defensive. "We don't exactly have much to give, and it doesn't look like you need anything from us either." "Oh, we don't want anything from you," the man assured us. In fact, we have something to offer you. And what might that be? My brother asked, though he sounded skeptical of the stranger's charity. Everything you don't have now. Clean clothes, a roof over your head, and some food to fill your bellies with. My stomach let out an involuntary growl that I hoped the man didn't hear. It had been weeks since we had a proper meal that didn't come out of the trash can. The mere mention of food reminded my body of its own desperation. Yeah, forgive me for doubting you, but why on earth would you do that? My brother asked. What's in it for you? We're not selling our bodies to you if that's what you're getting at. Oh, heavens, no. The suited man sounded genuinely surprised at the insinuation. All we want is to spread the word of our religion. That's all. You just have to come with us to our church and listen to our sermons. We'll give you food to eat, new clothes to wear, and a comfortable bed to sleep on for as long as you're there. And of course, if you don't like it there, then you're free to leave at any time. We'll get to sleep in a bed? I asked, speaking up for the first time since the suited man approached us. Of course, the suited man said. You'll be well taken care of in the house of our God. I looked at my brother with pleading eyes. The hopeful look on my face must have broken down his wall of doubt about the suited man's offer. Our situation couldn't get any worse anyways. And besides, it wasn't strange for a church to offer free charity to the homeless, right? The two of us followed the suited man, whose name we learned was Gabriel, to a large church tucked in an obscure corner of the city. It didn't look all that different from a regular church, not that I've been to many churches in my life. The only weird thing about it was how the cross at the very top of the church seemed to have a large eye carved in the middle of it. A nice older lady who wore the same strange cross around her neck greeted us at the church entrance. She handed us some new clothes and led us to the church bathroom to change. The clothes they gave us were weird, to say the least. The pants were normal, but the top was a long ankle-length purple robe with the eye-bearing cross emblazoned over the heart. Literal beggars like us couldn't be choosers, though. So my brother and I both changed into them and took a seat in the church pew alongside dozens of other people dressed in the exact same purple robe. A man started distributing sandwiches and bottles of water to everyone seated. My brother and I were so hungry that we gobbled up our sandwiches in seconds, not even bothering to register its taste. The man distributing the food chuckled. You two look like you could use seconds, he said, before handing us both an extra sandwich. So far, everything was great. My brother and I were ecstatic at finally finding people who seemed to care about us. But then, the sermon started. A man behind the church podium began speaking about how mortal minds were unable to handle divine wisdom, and that it is our duty as human beings to strive to see the world the way that God does as much as possible. He explained that the church's name was the Temple of the Third Eye, and that they were dedicated to letting people see the world through God's eyes, through their teachings and rituals. The more he spoke, the more I felt like he wasn't talking about any God I'd ever heard of. That didn't matter, though. Even if I didn't believe them, they were the only ones to ever give me the time of day aside from my brother. The least I could do was listen to what they had to say. After the sermon was over, we were all escorted by the preacher to a building attached to the church, where hundreds of beds lay. He told us that for as long as we were part of the church and attended the sermons, we could sleep there and be fed by them 3 times a day. It all seemed too good to be true, and it was. My brother and I got into a fight for the first and only time in our lives later that night. He wanted us to leave, called the church a dangerous cult that would only spell trouble down the line. He was right, but I didn't want to listen. I told him that even if he was right, I would rather stay there where it's safe and warm, instead of going back to live on the streets again. My brother left the church before night fell. The members of the church didn't stop him. Instead, they comforted me and assured me that they would take care of me for as long as I stayed there. I felt like I was being welcomed to a new family, one that could care and provide for me in the cold and uncaring world. Years passed as I grew into an adult under the Temple of the Third Eye's care. I became more and more involved in the dark side, hiding underneath its charitable exterior. Even when they started putting me to back-breaking labor to earn my keep in the church, I only saw it as me paying them back for everything they'd done for me as a hungry, homeless kid. In that time, I've lied for them, stolen from them, and in the end, I killed for them. A journalist had been reported snooping around the church one time too many, and the higher-ups at the Temple of the Third Eye were getting worried. They decided that their best course of action would be to silence him, permanently. My indoctrinated mind felt honored to be asked to defend the faith when I was chosen for the task by my seniors. I would only later learn their true reason for choosing me when it was much too late. I was given the reporter's address and told to wait to kill him there. It was a crappy studio apartment in the rough part of town that even the police tended to ignore. Human life was cheap there, so my seniors were hoping that the authorities would chalk his murder up to a burglary gone wrong, or a gang hit gone right. I broke into the apartment through the back window with a hammer and waited for him next to the front door. When I heard the doorknob rattle an hour later, I held my hammer up to prepare to strike. The reporter opened the door and stepped inside. Our eyes met for a split second, and surprise flooded his face, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I brought the hammer down on his head before he could say anything. I felt his skull shatter upon impact with a sickening crack. Blood spurted off the top of his head and trickled down his shocked face. His eyes rolled into the back of his skull before he crumpled to the floor, lifeless. My job was done, and my heart was pounding. I wanted to leave right away, but something about him was still bothering me. Unable to shake the uneasy feeling growing inside me, I closed the door to the apartment and took my time flipping his body over to examine his face. Upon closer inspection, I realized with a mix of horror and regret what it was that bothered me about him. I knew his face. He had the same exact face as mine underneath the stubbles of his beard. The man wasn't just a random journalist looking for a big story. He was my twin brother. The same one I'd abandoned all those years ago for the cult that took over my life. My seniors at the Temple of the Third Eye knew my brother would never hurt me if he recognized me, so they sent me to kill him knowing he wouldn't retaliate. They overestimated my loyalty, however. I immediately turned myself into the police for my brother's murder and cooperated with them to expose the Temple of the Third Eye. I hope I was able to help in bringing that cult down for good. Now, I'm serving my sentence in prison for killing my brother, and will be for a long time. I betrayed the only family I ever had for a place to sleep and food to eat. Here in prison, that's exactly what I get, and it's more than I deserve. I grew up in a doomsday cult. However, I didn't realize that's what it was until much later. Since I was born and raised there, I just assumed that all the messed up stuff I saw growing up was the way things were supposed to be. Whether it be the beatings we'd be subjected to for not doing our chores well enough, or the way our teachers would demonize the world outside our little community. I thought it was all normal because that's what my parents and elders told me. Kids tend to take things at face value like that. We called ourselves the Last Family because that's what we thought we would become. Every Sunday, the entire town would gather at the church to listen to our leader, Father Christopher, preach about how we chosen few will be the ones to inherit the earth after God has destroyed every civilization on the planet. Well, I called the place a town, but in reality it was a little more than a survival compound in the middle of the Arizona desert. There, the cult could hide from the outside world and prepare for the end of the world they thought was coming. I never questioned them. They were my elders, after all. I thought that they probably knew more about how the world worked than I did. I kept that mind frame all the way up to the day that I left. It wasn't me who decided to leave, though. I was about 11 years old when this all happened. It started with a sermon at the church held by our leader, Father Christopher himself. The usual last family sermon was already a fire and brimstone speech meant to instill fear in its devout listeners, but this one was even more full of vitriol than usual. At first, Father Christopher shouted the scripture at us in the dramatic way we'd come to expect from him, but near the end of his impassioned speech, his voice grew calm and took on a grim tone that scared his flock more than the overt rage and zeal of his usual sermon. "My faithful children," he said in a low voice that caused a somber atmosphere to pervade every pew of the church. "It is with a heavy heart that I tell you all that the end is upon us. Not of the world, though I know that will come soon as well. No, what I speak of is the end of us and our way of life, of the last family and its faithful members, not at the hands of God, but of men." An uneasy silence fell upon the church. Nobody wanted to say anything, or rather, nobody could. We all knew Father Christopher was quick to punish anyone who interrupted him during a sermon, so we kept our mouths shut and our questions to ourselves. It felt like an eternity before Father Christopher finally broke the silence. "The unwitting servants of the devil may come to take us away from our home any day now. Their earthly leaders have deemed us to be a threat to their tyrannical authority over men's souls. They could not possibly understand that we are merely trying to protect the soul of humanity from the end of days. They shall be forced to die 1,000 deaths in the pit of fire, while we die only once, and be welcomed by the Lord's embrace." Father Christopher dismissed us early that day, but only the children. The adults had to stay behind for the rest of the sermon. Despite the foreboding tone of the sermon, I remember feeling glad to have more free time that time. Over-exaggeration wasn't new to Father Christopher anyways. He must have predicted the exact date of doomsday that obviously didn't happen like 3 times before already. Given his track record, I thought the sermon was just another case of him making mountains out of molehills again, and brushed it off. I said goodbye to my older brother Jacob, who was old enough to be considered an adult by the last family standards, and went out to play with the other kids, who were also eager to make use of their newfound free time. Later that night, I was awoken from my sleep by someone shaking me. I opened my blurry eyes and saw my brother standing over me with a look of silent panic on his face. "Jacob?" I asked, still tired from all the playing I did that day. "What's wrong? Is Father Christopher calling us to him again? I didn't hear any announcement." "Don't worry about him, sis," Jacob said in a soft voice. "I'm gonna need you to do everything I say, okay? I'm sure you have a lot of questions, but you have to trust me right now. Can you do that?" Sure," I said, growing concerned. Is everything all right?" "Everything will be all right," Jacob assured me. "Now, keep your voice down and follow me. Also, try not to make any noise." Jacob held me by the hand and led me out of the communal sleeping area I shared with over a dozen other kids in the compound. I couldn't see very well in the pitch darkness, but Jacob didn't seem to have any trouble guiding me. I guess he must have allowed his eyes to adjust to the dark already. He opened the door and eased it closed behind us, as if he were handling dynamite, careful to not make any excess noise with the way he moved. No sooner had he closed the door, we saw the beams of multiple flashlights approaching us from the direction of the church. "Shit," Jacob cursed under his breath, before lowering his back to me. "Hurry, hop on my back." I was confused, but did as I was told, and kept quiet. I could feel his heart beating out of his chest as he carried me on his back through the compound, like a thief in the night. I'm sure my own heart must have been racing as well. Jacob only let me down once we reached the border of our compound, marked by a tall barbed wire fence. He pushed aside a tall bush on the fence, revealing a large gap in the wire wide enough to fit a person through. He squeezed himself through to the other side before turning to look at me. "Follow me," Jacob said in a hushed whisper. "Hurry." At that, I hesitated. Up until that very moment, the compound had been my whole world, and everyone there had warned me about the outside world. Just taking a step beyond that fence felt like stepping into the lion's den. I thought God might strike me down where I stood the moment I set foot on the other side. "Please, sis," Jacob pleaded. "I don't want to leave you here." It was the desperate look in my brother's eyes that finally got me to follow him. He led me to a truck parked just outside the compound. The high-ranking members, who could come and go as they pleased, often used it to do supply runs outside the compound. I don't know how Jacob got his hands on its keys, but at that point I didn't bother to ask. He drove us far away from the compound at full speed. I watched through the back window of the car as everything I've ever known grew smaller and smaller before disappearing in the distance. We eventually made it to what I would later learn was called a hotel. My brother rented us a room and told me to wait in it, with the door locked until he got back from the police station. I didn't waste any time playing around all the new things I'd never seen before in the hotel room. Among those things were the television. I pressed the biggest button on the TV and jumped back when the screen lit up with moving pictures. I would have been delighted at the new discovery if it wasn't for what these moving pictures showed me. The channel was tuned to the news, in which the reporter was covering a massacre, complete with live footage at a place I recognized. It was the compound I'd just left, my old home. They showed the communal sleeping area where I myself was asleep only a few hours before. The kids on the beds, people I knew and grew up with, lay lifeless in sheets, stained by their own blood. Their expressions were frozen in a silent, eternal scream. Blood poured from large slits on their throats. At the foot of their beds were the bodies of the adults, their parents, and guardians of the kids. The adults all had knives sticking out of their chests, with their cold, dead hands still gripping the handle. The reporter explained that the adult members of the last family had smothered and slit the throats of their children before taking their own lives with the very same knives. They had all decided that it was better to die with their children than be separated from them once the authorities came to inspect the compound. All except one. To this day, I can't thank my brother enough for bringing me away from that cult. I intend to make the best out of this new life he's given me.